Okay, everyone, welcome back to part two of Reframe, our workshop series, where we are going to be talking more about Code of Ethics and how it aligns with Reframe as a text. We're really excited to share this with you all today, just as we wrap up this webinar series. So before we get started, I'd like to invite everybody to engage in a little bit of a present moment awareness. If your legs are crossed, go ahead and put both feet firmly on the ground. Find yourself a comfortable seat. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes or turn off your camera so that you have a moment where you can just be and then let out all of that kind of stale air that's just been sitting there. Take a deep breath in and just pause at the top as you slowly let the breath out. And then just observe for a second as you allow your breath to go back to its normal rhythm. What do you hear? Might be cars driving by. It might be behavior technicians with their learners in the center. Might be your own children or neighborhood children. Might be the wind or birds. And now allow yourself to notice what's happening inside of your body. Where do you feel some somatic symptoms? Do you feel tension within your shoulders, your neck? Can you ease that tension at all? Roll your shoulders back or forward. Maybe stomp out your feet a little bit, wake up your legs, stretch out your arms and your hands. And allow yourself to just kind of be again, though. And now remind yourself of what brought you into this space today. What is it that you value enough to give 2 hours of your day today? Are there any other thoughts that are coming up that might be barriers? Let them go so that you can engage in values-based behavior. Okay, so now we're going to open our eyes again. You can turn back on your camera if you feel comfortable. And we will get started. So we just engaged in what it looks like to engage in some psychological flexibility. That exercise is really designed just to get what's happening on the inside connected to what's happening on the outside, right? So we really just focused on one of our observation skills, which is hearing, right? But then we ended up connecting what was happening inside of our bodies to the world around us by engaging in behaviors, right? So those overt behaviors to help relieve what was happening inside of our bodies. But then we also connected our minds, that inner behavior, the thought of value, what do we value, with what we're doing right now. So we're adding intentionality or mindfulness into this practice today. That's really what psychological flexibility is. I invited us to let go of the barrier behaviors in our mind, right? Those inner barrier behaviors, those intruding thoughts, those thoughts that tell us that I don't even know why I'm doing this. I'll be real. I heard you say that there's a shared value, but I really just needed to get a CEU credit for ethics. That's understandable. That's not necessarily a barrier behavior. It just might mean that as far as your values are concerned, maybe there's some more exploration that needs to happen there, right? Because that can help us then let go of whatever it is that makes us feel a little less than, a little more of a nihilist. where we don't have to care about anything. Nothing really matters. We can be apathetic. And that can be really easy to do, especially in today's society. It's really easy to turn off. We're encouraged to turn off and to not care about our fellow man or woman or other. So, why does it seem so hard for us to connect into that? Shouldn't be such a struggle, right? It's conditioning, it's operant conditioning from its core. So when we look at our code of ethics and we look at what it looks like for 1.07 to be culturally responsive with what we're doing, we can't turn that off. We have to be able to align our values with our behavior, even with something as simple as attending a CEU event, because that's truly showing up for our stakeholders and our learners. When again, we're looking at this kind of overlap and parallel, and Reframe is not an ethical text, right? It's not what it's designed to do. We touch on it actually quite a bit in the first part of the book. And again, we outline that this isn't designed to be a book to tell you how to run ethics. There are lots of great books about that. Thank you, Doctors LeBlanc and Sellers, for that. Very appreciative. But we also, and of course, Bailey, we can't forget the original, but also, this isn't what that's about. Reframe is now telling us how to do this in a compassionate way. But when we're talking about the how, we can't ignore our ethics. That's why it's at the forefront of the book to say this is really what drove the idea behind Reframe, which is how do we do ethical behavior change that is compassionate and culturally responsive and does no harm? Really and truly, when we're looking through the shifting from rigidity to flexibility, this idea of psychological flexibility, that requires a vulnerability that you have to have with yourself to engage in behaviors that might feel discomforting or uncomfortable because you're not used to them. And because, again, when we look at operant conditioning and from society and from social norms, social reinforcement, things that we understand from Cooper, we also now can see how that plays out in our own lives. It has conditioned this behavior of apathy, the behavior of not caring, the behavior of turning off, the behavior of it doesn't really matter, does it? All of these things are truly things that we do as behavior analysts on a daily basis, and I've observed it. I've observed behavior analysts walk into a room and completely steamroll through what a learner might be trying to say or communicate, not offering them help, right? Not prompting them to a solution to be able to make a choice or solve a problem. And when we look at the evidence, when we look at response-based strategies, that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be using differential reinforcement with teaching procedures. What are we teaching? You don't know yet. You just walked into a room and told them to follow a direction. That's not teaching. So we have this idea embedded within our ABA world about what the application of ABA is supposed to look like. It can only be with autistic children, right? What is that? That's that's not right. But that's what it's been conditioned within our field, right? We've been conditioned within our field with some very Lovasian ideology, and we can't ignore that. So we have to shift away from that practice. And that's really, really hard to do sometimes. When we're fresh out of grad school, we don't see it. We have our blinders on because that's all we know. And then we're trying to generalize this. application to a broader setting. Suddenly, we're in a clinic or we're in a school and we're trying to apply these principles, and we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I only learned how to do this within a certain community. And now I'm being asked to really differentiate this application, generalize this application across different contexts that I'm not as familiar with. And so instead of becoming and responding more flexibly or with flexibility, we respond with rigidity. That's out of my scope. I don't know how to do that. You do. It's the behaviors of principle, the principles of behavior. I knew that sounded weird. That's what's happening there. So it just takes this approach that's slightly more vulnerable for us to truly tap into what it looks like to apply this text from Reframe, a textbook that fully explains how to provide compassionate care. And this is one of the how-tos. Start with yourself. Now, recognize that you do have some values that played into you becoming a behavior analyst. What are they? It probably wasn't to walk into a room and tell a child what to do. But so many of us, that's what we do. Or we end up on the administrative side where when's the last time that you've even worked with a learner and you're trying to apply these principles with, or telling people to apply these principles when you haven't been in the trenches and Lord knows how long. That happens too because y'all still need CEU. It's understandable. But what brought you there? Something, some sort of shared value, right? So I get asked this often within just within for my own RBTs, which is how do I respond to a child whenever they start engaging in like challenging behavior or they're really rigid or they're digging their heels in the sand. And so I say, with your own flexibility, right? Everybody wants to know how to respond with yourself first. So we model psychological flexibility. We call them DRA strategies in our agency because they are. They're alternative behaviors that we're going to be differentially reinforcing because that's what psychological flexibility is. So you're going to engage in all of these different behaviors until something works. You're going to reinforce the thing that works because then that's going to show you where that learner has these strengths. And it's also going to model to you and show to you how to stay calm when the storm is raging. I can see that this is a struggle right now, right? That's what's happening. We're struggling to accept what's happening. There's been a change and we can't accept it. So we're stuck here in this area of fusion and inability to accept. So I'm probably not going to model any of those behaviors first. I'm not going to say, man, we just got to accept it, don't we? Because how would that feel to you if that's what your supportive therapeutic guide was instructing you to do? First, take a deep breath. Then, how would you want somebody to respond to you? We encourage in our agency as well for us to receive outside therapy. I receive outside therapy. The therapist, when she's responding to me, she takes it in. And she'll then often say, okay. And then she'll show up with some curiosity. Is it possible? Does it seem like? Could it be? Okay. And maybe if I were in a heightened state, which I'm usually not in therapy, that might be difficult to hear or receive. So I would shift how I would respond instead of saying something like that. And I'm sure that my therapist would shift and respond instead of saying something like that. So instead of showing up with curiosity first, it might instead be like, let's regroup for a second. There's a lot going on, and I feel a little overwhelmed. I don't know about you, but I do. So I'm just going to ground myself for a little bit. And I might just do some tapping, right? These are things that I'm doing. I'm not expecting anybody else to do this, but this is how I'm still responding to this challenge that's arisen in a session or whatever it might be, or in the classroom, because I'm practicing regulation. That's what's happening whenever we're doing psychological flexibility. Wouldn't you all agree? Yeah. And then when we're talking about learners who don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, who need co-regulation, what are we doing for them? We're filling that need. We're not telling them what to do. We're not, oh my God, my baby, I can't believe that this is happening to you. Let's remove all challenges from your life. We're not doing that either. We're simply regulating our behavior, which means that we're in turn prompting by modeling co-regulation strategies and regulation strategies for our learners. This is why when we're looking at response strategies, I always say start with yourself. Then show up for the learner in a helpful and supportive way. It looks like maybe we need a little help right now. What's going on? Right? Listen to them. Offer a drink of water. Say, do you want me to listen? We've got time. Let me hear you out, man. Because often what I found is that the situation escalated because we skipped step one, which is functional communication. I don't care what you want to say. What I want to say matters, and what I need you to do matters more, right? I'm the adult, you're the kid. The power struggle, the power dynamic at play. We see this happen in classrooms often, right? I don't want to hear you right now. It's time to get this done. Meanwhile, the student missed half of the instruction and didn't realize that they were supposed to finish drawing out something, and then they got a 50% on it because they didn't hear that instruction. The first half of it looked great, but you missed the whole second half. But when I asked you for clarification, teacher, you told me I couldn't talk. Based on operant conditioning, I'm not going to talk. So we have to think about when we're responding, or we responding flexibly to the context. Are we using our own regulation before we recognize that maybe the student has something to say? We need to allow for that functional communication response to happen and then go from there. And I would say yes. And I know that I'm talking with two colleagues right now who love skills-based treatment as well. So when we look at SBT, the first step, and your student's never going to be an HRE if you don't listen to them. So I'll tell you that much. So if they're trying to tell you something, you better listen. And it might not be something you want to hear. It might be that they didn't like what you said. Okay, regulate your own behaviors. Model what it looks like to accept that. And then move forward and address it from a place of teaching and compassion. And that's my psychological flexibility soapbox, really. It's my favorite. It's the for me, like one of the best ways to respond to challenges. And it's effective. The data show it. Yep. Ooh, I love radical behaviorism. Who's going to talk about this one?
Do you want to get us started and tell us what you love? Mari, I saw it
Yeah, and then I'll pass it over to Maddie. Does that sound good to you?
for me.
So, psychological flexibility, it leads right into radical behaviorism, right? I immediately in our exercise had us tap into what was happening inside, right? So, far reaching behaviorism. How far within ourselves are we willing to assess? And that's where we often need to start before we start talking about learners. Like, we don't necessarily need to talk about like learners' thoughts and feelings. We're not talk therapists, right? So, it's important to make that distinction. But as radical behaviorists, we do need to tap into what's happening with ourselves because if not, it's going to be hella hard to engage in empathetic practices or compassionate practices. And Madi, what would you say about that?
Man, I have a lot to say about it. And I think, the biggest thing is what we understand the definition of radical behaviorism to really be. We still have, many in the field that say and think that they are radical behaviorists or, radical behavior analysts, but they're still ignoring or kind of dismissing that environment that Skinner told us we need to focus on, which is that internal environment. Not just the learners and the caregivers, but our own internal environment and how those emotions and thoughts, you know, they create biases and, perspectives that we carry around in this backpack. And, you know, I think that leads to the general population and community when they hear radical behaviorism, they think of the rigid, old school BMOD, you know, practice and mindset. And, that wasn't the original intention, right? Was to use what we know about human learning and behavior to essentially kind of dominate people. It was really about freeing people from, these contingencies and, learning histories that had them stuck, right? In something that may have been punishing, but because that's essentially all the tools that they had, even that cycle of, behaviors that led to punishing consequences, that cycle in and of itself is familiar. And I think we can see that in ourselves as humans and professionals that, we can kind of revert back to some very rigid behaviors. And that's not radical. That's not what was intended by the definition of it, the principles that fall within it. It's we have to acknowledge our reluctance to pull in the internal environment for ourselves, for the learner, for the caregivers, for everybody involved, for our colleagues. We're all three business owners, for our staff. It's such a critical component because that's the first environment. That is the primary environment. And within that environment, like you said, Meg, it's similar to what I shared in this last presentation workshop, that how we were raised, right? Not just personally from our own caregivers and our families, but how we were raised professionally, right? Who raised you? What research raised you? What coursework raised you to be the behavior analyst that you are today? And if that rearing or raising kind of dismisses or invalidates that primary internal environment, we're not practicing radical behaviorism. It's just another word for BMOD. And it's the reason why we get a lot of pushback on the work that we're doing, because that's not what we're doing. Well, at least the three of us, that's not what we're engaging in, is this very rigid, inflexible, set of behaviors with the intent to control another human being. That's not what we were intended to do. I think I might have mentioned it in our previous presentation or another presentation we've done together. Our job is to identify setting events, variables, reinforcers, stimuli in someone's environment that leave them stuck in these unhealthy, unhelpful cycles, and to help them identify those things so that then they have the choice to change. Because really, it's about helping someone to reveal those things, because then choice becomes the most powerful option for someone. And we're not removing that. Our job is not to manipulate and remove choice. It's to create the opportunity for choice. And if we have good rapport, if we have a solid, genuine, authentic therapeutic relationship, we can also then work on the internal environment that may leave someone reluctant to want to make a different choice. But if it's all about like, I've got, my thumb on you, and you're just going to do these flashcards, and you're going to go to the bathroom when I say you can go to the bathroom, that's not radical. That's a person who, in my personal opinion, has found an environment that they can control when every other environment in their life is uncontrollable. And that's not healing us, the person. It's perpetuating, again, patterns of behavior that we're comfortable with, because it's not, I would say, it's not reinforcing to me to control someone else. It's kind of punishing, because that relationship is not going to be a healthy one. But if that's what we know, then that's what we're going to repeat. And I think, it's really important that we emphasize that the core pieces of radical behaviorism assert that, thoughts and feelings and actions, they're all behavior. They all play, a very intimate role with each other. They're all influenced by each other. And so that means that all of those are subjected to this kind of like contextual influence, right? Like it's individualized, like how you're going to be influenced in your thoughts and in your emotions or feelings, and then the actions that follow that. It's very individualized to a person. It's kind of like, you have a really negative experience with an individual historically in your family, this person maybe every Sunday made chocolate chip cookies, and that smell is there. It's like a core memory that connects you to a very punishing experience with an individual. And then you can go somewhere outside of that context, and when you smell the smell of those cookies, all of those things come rushing back, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. And if we're not self-reflecting and self-aware, it's more often subconsciously. And we engage in behaviors. We pull things out of our backpack that we don't even realize that we're pulling out. And we engage in actions and words that reflect kind of the storm internally that we're experiencing because of some, stimuli or variable of a smell. And nobody's going to know that. But if we dismiss that entire experience that happened, people aren't going to be very sympathetic or empathetic to a person who's suddenly their behavior has changed. And they may not be able to put their finger on why. So, we have to look at radical behaviorism as through this lens of, we're not trying to control behavior. We're trying to understand it within specific contexts of why they occur, especially for the population that we're working with, who are so often misunderstood, so often pathologized. I mean, that's the lens that we're taught to view them from, is from a misunderstood, pathologized, broken point of view. And so we really can't engage in this type of radical, and I mean, like, I don't want to, we say it so much that the word kind of loses its strength and meaning, but like radical, like crazy. Like, let's be, in the best sense, let's be those that swim against the current. Like, we're not afraid to, and not afraid to embrace all of the environments and recognize that our job is just to help ourselves first, to understand the context in which these behaviors and things occur. But then also our job is to then help that individual to engage in that self-reflection and understand why they engage in those behaviors, where those things stem from in that internal environment. And until we really truly understand that that is the definition of radical behaviorism, I don't know that we're going to do our field justice and the community justice in showing how we are humanizing this science and the application of it. And there you go. You don't have to believe me, the brown lady. You can believe the old white guy. Skinner, he acknowledged private events. He also knew that back in his day, they didn't have the technology they have today, that we have, to hook up brains and do brain scans and see, like, oh, that's an emotion lighting up in that part of the brain. Oh, that's some sort of thought or listening is occurring in that part of the brain. We can now see that. So it's not that those, we can't use the excuse, oh, it's not observable, it's not measurable. We just don't have those tools on a day-to-day basis. And so it requires trust from the individual to be able to tell you why that part of the brain is lighting up when we can't see it. So you don't have to take my word for it. Take this guy's word. Jen, you want to jump on this part, or you want me to finish? I'm good either way.
I can jump in here if you'd like, and then take us into it being assent-based, if that makes sense. So this is a quote that I really love, that is a Skinner quote that was used to make this point in a Fabrizio and Moore's presentation back in 2013, discussing voting with your feet. And essentially, a person is responding, as Madi said, to the physical world around them, right? With a different set of nerves. And it is, in fact, our job to make the unobservable observable, if you will. I was discussing this with somebody actually just yesterday, where over the years, I've been to many conferences and many different presentations, and there's there's many that really stick out in my mind, but some to the point that similar to what Madi was saying, but in a good way, can remember the smell in the room, exactly where I was, exactly what was going on. And one of them for me was this talk that Pat Fryman did. I was in the basement of the big tall building at UMass Amherst because I was at Babbitt, and it was, I don't know, probably 2010, maybe 2012. And anyone who's been there, you have to go down these like Harry Potter kind of escalators. They remind me of like if anybody has ever been to London, the London underground system is very far underground. And so there's these massive, massive escalators that you have to take. And you actually have to take very similar escalators to get down to the basement of where Babbitt used to be at UMass Amherst. And Pat Fryman did a talk on anxiety. and how anxious behaviors actually are observable, right? Because when somebody is having the internal experience of anxiety, they engage in external behaviors that are observable and measurable. The reality is that's actually true for lots of other emotions as well. And so we're really good at recognizing it when it's happiness, because everyone sees someone that's like, eh. Though I'll be honest, my face looks like that when I'm actually really overstimulated. My natural face actually doesn't look like that. Maybe the New York in me has like sullied that. I'm not sure, but that is not what my natural face looks like. I do think that it is what my friend Meg here's natural face looks like. Her natural face is one that is fairly smiley, and that's really awesome. But mine doesn't, right? And so like you can tell that she's like, generally pretty happy. And I'm actually generally fairly happy too, but my face doesn't look like that. Right. And so you have to kind of know somebody to know those things about them, right? And when you know somebody, you can actually tell what the observable, measurable behaviors are with a lot of their other feelings. Um, like anxiety, right? What are the things that somebody does when they're feeling anxious? I have all these, I'm a crystal collector. I have all these like little palm stones, all actually everywhere that I exist in the world, to be honest. But they're always within a hand's reach of my desk, partially because they help quell my anxiety, and partially because they help keep my hands busy when they don't know what else to do. Someone who knows that about me knows that if you see me doing this, that means, maybe I'm having some feelings that, or maybe anxious in nature, right? And that's true for, again, a lot of other emotions as well. And so easy emotions, not overly complex emotions like happy, sad, mad, the ones that your preschooler can tell you about, are, very easy for people to determine. However, more complex emotions, it's actually not really any different. People do have consistent behaviors that they engage in. And so, while we can't see, we're not hooked up to a brain scan all the time. We can't see what's going on there, but we can, if we're looking, see what's going on here, right? And when we're really in tune with that for ourselves, right? First for ourselves, right? You have to put your oxygen mask on first. And then for the people who we are working with, you can tell a lot if you're looking, right? If you're not looking, you're going to miss it. And so oftentimes people will say, I'm sure you've all heard this, there was no antecedent event. Yeah, there was. There actually was. It's just a matter of whether you missed it or it was internal versus external, right? And that's part of our job, right? Is to really determine if those things are existing and to evaluate them when we first start to see them, which takes us kind of to our next section that is assent based. So, assent is more than just a buzzword in behavior analysis. Um, I think lots of people have lots of opinions about what assent is not. Should you use it? Should you not use it? Is it important? I think everyone thinks it's important, right? But I don't know. Maybe someone says it's not important, right? Hopefully not in 2025. Nobody's saying that, but who knows? Um, does it belong in practice? Does it not belong in practice? Where does it belong in practice? You just let kids do whatever you want, right? All of these things. So when we're talking about assent, we're talking about our learners' willing, active, and ongoing voluntary participation in treatment. We're not talking about whether their parent signed the consent form for them to get ABA therapy. That is consent. That is not the same as assent, right? We're asking on an ongoing basis or looking on an ongoing basis, are you assenting to what is going on? It means that the individual is actively indicating through words, gestures, or behavior that they agree to engage in the activity, therapy, or activity being presented. If you're paying attention, you'll be able to tell these signs and signals probably fairly easily. It's pretty generally, I think, fairly easy to determine whether somebody does or does not want to be someplace, right? In fact, at times, this is why, if anyone who knows who Anna Wintour is, this is literally why she wears sunglasses. Because people will be able to tell from her eyes. If you're not familiar with who that is, she is the editor-in-chief of Vogue. She is approaching retirement. It is super sad, for me anyway. She has been a pivotal person in the fashion world. If you've seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, Miranda Priestley is character is designed after Anna Wintour. And so she wears, I wish that I could be Anna Wintour, sunglasses at all fashion shows, actually in lots of places. And her reason behind it is so that people can't tell what she thinks. It helps protect her from her own kind of outward, she says that her eyes say a lot. And so it protects that from people knowing kind of what's going on there, right? I sometimes wish that I could do that. I actually was at a conference recently and I thought of that. And I was like, man, if I was Anna Wintour, I could just have my sunglasses on and no one would actually think about what I'm here, like what I'm thinking about the content that I'm presenting, that I'm not presenting, that I'm hearing being presented, right? Anyway, all to say that like our learners are not walking around with sunglasses all the time. They're not Anna Wintour. If they are, they're probably incredibly fabulous, and that sounds amazing. And I want a ticket with them to a fashion show, but that's not what's happening. They're not wearing sunglasses all the time unless they are electing to. And in which case, I would say if in the middle of your instruction, a learner puts sunglasses on, they're probably engaging in a scent withdrawal. And so you can tell these things very closely. You can often tell what people are thinking by looking at their face, right? And so when you're paying attention to your learner and you know your learner well, you will be able to know whether they are actively displaying signs that they would like to engage or not like to engage. And that's how you help determine if they're an active participant. Not every learner can use their words. Not every learner has self-advocacy skills in their repertoire to be able to engage in functional communication around asking for a change in activity or not doing this or taking a break or whatever. But actions speak volumes. And one of the important things is remembering that it's an ongoing process. It's not just when you get to the table or when you get to an activity. It is all the time throughout that activity. Do we have consistent assent, or is a learner engaging in assent withdrawal? And to us, if you're not engaging in assent-based care, if you're not engaging in compassionate care, and it's our job to observe, honor, and adapt throughout our instruction all day, every day, to ensure that a learner is assenting. And so again, it's not this one-time yes, it's all the time. You said yes to get here, right? Are you still saying yes? At one point I engaged in an assent withdrawal behavior. I looked at my phone, right? I opened my phone, and then I came back, right? Like very normal things that we do. The reason that we do this in practice is because it helps to center the learner's autonomy and decision making and allows them to be a very active participant in instruction, in their therapy, in their life, right? And it empowers them to have a voice and to have choice. Anything that anyone wants to add to that? Okay. So, history, definitions, and misconceptions. The biggest misconception is that by engaging in assent-based practice, you just let somebody do whatever they want whenever they want to do it. And that's not true. Assent without boundaries equals chaos. That's what I tell people. ABC. Assent without boundaries equals chaos. Doesn't work. You always have to do something. You cannot sit in your own feces. You cannot not eat, right? You cannot not go home. We're going home at the end of the day. You got to go home too, And so there are boundary conditions in every environment that we are in. And depending on the environment that you are in, depends on what some of those boundary conditions are. And so I'll use the clinic that I'm currently in for an example. If you run out the front doors, you're in a parking lot. Now, lucky for you, we're in the middle of nowhere, and that parking lot leads into another parking lot that is still 100 yards away from the road and the river. Cool. there was intentionality behind picking this location, right? But you still can't run into a parking lot because that's not safe. You can't do that. There are cars. There might be a car out there, even though we live in the middle of nowhere. Oftentimes people come and turn around in our parking lot. They don't even know that we're here. There is a Amazon delivery driver. I don't know whose packages they are, but delivering packages all the time that's coming through, right? There are people out there. You can't do that, right? It is important that your health and safety are prioritized. It's important that if you have a dirty diaper, you are getting it changed. It is important that you are clothed. Your dignity matters, right? When learners are in the clinic and when adults are in the clinic too, everyone's got to wear their clothes. That is a rule. It is a boundary condition, right? If you are in a school, you can't just run into the principal's office because you feel like it. That's not something you're allowed to do. You're also not allowed to just run into the cafeteria where they make the food. That's something you're just not allowed to do, right? And so everywhere there's things we're just not allowed to do, and that's the real world. If we didn't teach our learners to understand those boundaries and have acceptable ways, right? Acceptable, I mean by society, right? Societal acceptable ways. That's probably not, I just made up some words there. But you can't freak out every time something doesn't go your way, right? And maybe that's what it looks like initially, because we need to teach you gently, kindly, and softly that everything isn't always going to go your way. We all had to learn this lesson in life. I still sometimes have to learn this lesson in life, and it's really hard. I like things to go my way. Um, it's just how I am. So sometimes that's hard, and I need to sit with that, right? And that is a skill that everyone needs to learn. And so we can teach that still using an assent and choice-based model. We talked about skills-based treatment. We do extensions of that in our clinic with food selectivity programming and actually branching that out over into health and hygiene protocols, because health and hygiene and food are like essential things for your life, right? And so if that is where the challenges occur the most, you got to do those things, right? Okay. Some history and definitions. Here's some articles because we're an ABA. We like research. We like articles. My kind of favorite one to talk about here, though I really do like the Smith and Bro article. It's really fantastic. I think they did a really nice job outlining assent-based practice and ethical, practical recommendations around that. Um, I think when I think about assent, I think about Michael Fabrizio. Michael, the presentation here, voting with your feet. I think a lot of people use that expression, and not everyone knows where that came from. And so that comes from Fabrizio and Moores, who at that time were Fabrizio and Moores Consulting, went on to open the Organization for Research and Learning out of Seattle, ORL. Michael is since not there anymore. He's moved on to doing some amazing compliance work, and ORL is run by the awesome Kelly Ferris. And they do extensive work around assent and assent-based practice. Michael has had what's called the Assent Lab, which is a cohort of people who all the work that they do is around assent, how you build assent into practice, coming up with definitions, what are critical and variable features of using assent-based care, and all sorts of really, really cool other things. What's interesting is like a lot of people outside behavior analysis have talked about assent for a very long time. Also, people within behavior analysis talk about assent with animals, right? And so, I'm going to steal Meg's line here. If we can do this with apex predators, why aren't we doing this with children, right? And so here's another kind of little list of some articles that discuss assent in practice as well. And dating it back really to the old white guy, as Madi so eloquently put it, right? To Skinner himself. This is actually not really something new. 1977 in Beyond Freedom and Dignity. He wants people to be free. They cannot be free when they are coerced, and they can feel free when they're in environments full of positive reinforcement. And so, a thing that I often hear, or not super often anymore, is, well, once you let them go away, how do you ever get them back? And it's twofold. One is the instruction is so interesting and cool and they're having so much fun. They don't actually, and it's safe. They don't actually want to go away. So that's like one part. And the other one is the environment is so safe and trusting and rich of reinforcement that actually once they chilled out for a beat, they want to come back. And so there's actually, I don't know that there's good research out there, right? In terms of like, you're going to find this in Java or behavior analysis and practice or insert whatever your favorite journal is here, right? But there's a lot of research, I use air quotes here, but I probably shouldn't. Research when you talk to people in practice, right? Often they say that that's research. But when you talk to people in practice that do this, they'll tell you that the outcomes are better than they were before. And everybody is happier. People are far more thrilled to deliver instruction. Learners are far more thrilled to receive instruction, and lots of really great learning goes on. So I am going to share a little thing before I pass this over onto meaningful. Um, So last week I was at Babbitt, which is our local here, and I did a talk on assent and choice for health and hygiene behaviors. And I asked everybody in the room how many people, and I actually did this as a CT-ABA event a few weeks ago as well, how many people are using assent-based practice. And at the CT-ABA event, every single person in the room raised their hand. Y'all, that's a newer thing. That was like super exciting. And at Babbitt, it was about 3/4 of the room. And so like that was really cool. It was cool to see that people are like, yep, this is a thing I'm doing. So can't wait till every room is full of hands going up for that question.
Same. I
Um,
think that's awesome.
yeah, so that's probably a good segue here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shows that assent-based practices are meaningful to our behavior analytic community. But that's awesome. That's really great news. I'm cautious with accepting verbal report because sometimes what I've observed is that people say that they engage in assent-based practices, and instead what they do is they will either just kind of allow whatever, right? The ABC, the without boundaries, or I've seen, or the flip side where they're like, no, it's assent-based practices. And I'm like, then why are you hovering? Why are you standing over them? So I don't know. I'm hopeful for our community, truly hopeful. Um, I'm also hopeful that when we look at like what this next thing, which is really the idea of meaningful came from the idea of child-led because and person-centered, right? Because when we look at that, I've seen child-led go the same way, where they're like, no, 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 this is child-led. I'm like, dude, you're literally, that's child following. Like, that's not child-led. You're not finding what's meaningful to change the kid's behavior or the learner's behavior. Instead, what you're doing is just kind of like allowing them to run the show. And that again leads to that chaos that Jen was referring to earlier. So that was the intention behind this meaningful part of reframe, the M of reframe. Because when we were looking at child-led, which is ultimately kind of the idea, or gentle parenting, right? Those types of concepts. The intention behind those two concepts was not, oh, you never have to face a challenge again in your entire life. Oh, you can have whatever you want to. Oh, let me give you everything that I can, right? That's not the idea behind those two concepts. And so we were trying to figure out a way to make sure that what we were saying was truly child-led and person-centered and compassionate, while we were also saying boundaries are still really important. Boundaries are actually what creates trust. And I know we talked about in the last workshop, but when we're talking about those boundaries, like what Jen was talking about earlier when we were going through Ascent, yes, we want to make sure that our learners are assenting to these demands, but that doesn't mean that they never have to change out of a soiled diaper. It also doesn't mean that we're going to use such a time delayed where it's going to cause a rash, right? And I see this happening often. And then when I look at this from a psychological flexibility or ACT lens, what I then end up seeing is the avoidance of within our own behavior as the implementer. We don't want to face the challenge of what happens when a learner withdraws their assent. And so what ends up happening is that we then pull back completely and avoid all challenges. And then we say the session was great in our session note. We had 0 instances of maladaptive behavior, signed, dated, blood stamp. That's not though like the reality, right? Because you didn't do anything. You provided respite care. And so let's ask ourselves, are you providing respite care or are you providing assent-based practices? That was my 5-minute long soapbox on that. But when we go into meaningful, I really want us to look at too. Oh, sorry, Jen. Could we go back to that one? Yeah, sorry. So when we look at meaningful though, and we apply this to our ethics code, this still is talking about person-centered care, involving clients and stakeholders. Now, there's a part of the code when it talks about assent that says when applicable. You honor assent when applicable. That's part of our ethics code, right? But if you notice here, 4.02, involving clients, a behavior analyst must actively involve clients in planning, implementing, and evaluating behavior change programs. That's not optional. That's not if applicable. But what also this does, if you're truly doing 4.02, is you're assuring assent-based practices because they're involved in the implementation of what it is that you're doing. If they withdraw their assent, they are no longer an active part of the implementation process, correct? That's not really arguable, right? So that's why when we're looking at what we're doing from a programming perspective, it isn't because you answered these questions on this interview standardized assessment form, because you answered this question, I'm now programming this as a goal. That's not client involvement. Because when I directly observed you, I saw that you hit your brother 5 times when they were trying to take your toys. I'm directly programming hitting. That's not client involvement. Let's reframe that. Let's reframe both of these instances now. Whole idea behind the book. Let's make this meaningful. So you did an assessment that was interview based, and following one-step directions was shown to be a deficit um, per that assessment tool. Fantastic. So you directly assess it and you say, brush teeth, wash hands, tie shoes. You're right. Negative, negative, negative. Now let's try it a different way where there might be some meaning behind what it is that you're doing that's meaningful to the learner. I found your favorite Lightning McQueen toothbrush at the store, and I have your strawberry flavored toothpaste that I know you like the most ready to go on your toothbrush. Now brush teeth. Do you think that that's more meaningful and consequently going to result in assent versus me barking an order at someone? I don't know.
And sounding like a robot too. Like who gives directives like that
The assessments,
to
the
your children?
assessors. That's right. But who does that? Behavior analysts, that's who do that. That you
You,
know, Body, you know who does
I
that.
know, but I mean, if people get so stuck in this world,
Right. And they're like, well, but I've got to give my
like,
favorite is when they flip Brene Brown and they say, I've got to give clear directions because clear is kind. And I'm like,
okay,
what?
then do that
That's
when you
not
go
what
out
that
the next
means.
time
Right?
to a
That's
party or
not
to
what
some
that
event.
means.
Go ahead, go do that. Go do that at a conference to people, like, and talk that way.
Yeah, seriously.
And the answer
Um,
to who does this is me 10 years ago. It was me. Hi. I'm the problem. It's me.
no, you
Many
aren't
of,
the problem. You're the part that
not any, not,
shifted.
for sure. But like many, it was many of us, right?
But
We
wouldn't
were
you
there
say, but let's
with
say that
you.
the learner then withdrew their assent from that demand. Whose fault was it? If the learner's always right.
Oh, well, it depends on whether you ask me now or you ask me then. Because if you ask me then,
100%. And so
it
that's what I was
wasn't
saying about verbal
me.
report.
It must have been a motivational issue,
That was
unrelated to
it.
me. But a better
Right.
reinforcement.
There wasn't the reinforcement hadn't been established.
It wasn't
Yeah,
strong enough.
you
Get
got
something
it.
else.
Yeah, 100%. We've got a million variables that we like to blame things on other than ourselves. So, 4.02, right? We've got to involve the stakeholders and the learners in what we're doing. Because again, they're going to withdraw their assent. And when they withdraw their assent, they're telling us their involvement. When we also talk about the service decision too, how many times have you seen agencies legitimately shut down people who are like, I have I have things. My kid goes to school and I can only commit to 10 hours a week. I'm sorry, if you can't commit to 40 hours a week, we can't provide ABA services to you. Well, I have a question for you if that's the scenario, because it sometimes is. Sometimes what is necessary is 40 hours a week. That requires a discussion with the family. But I will say this, if you're only doing 40 hours a week and there's no opportunity for generalization, how are you programming for generalization? How are you allowing these behaviors to happen elsewhere? So this is again why insurance companies ask that we put in fade plans because they say like, okay, but then like they can't be with you for 40 hours for the rest of their lives. And so you do have to involve the clients and the stakeholders in this conversation, which is you have a 2-year-old who's receiving earlier or intensive EIBI services. Great way to do the hard work up front. But I'm not going to recommend 40 hours a week because what's most appropriate for this 2-year-old's development is that we also work on a sleep hygiene so that they're taking naps still during the day. So I'm going to end our sessions at 1 o'clock and build in that hygiene to get them ready to assent to taking a nap. Because again, they're two. Because what will happen is at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and we've been going on for 6 or 7 hours with this kiddo, it's not good. We're going to see nothing but problem behavior, and everybody's going to say, what's going on here? Clearly, the reinforcement's not strong enough. You're no shit. It's not strong enough. Oh man, first one of the day. Dang it. Yeah, of course it wasn't strong enough because the only thing powerful enough to compete with what that learner needed was a nap. Like, just let them close their eyes. That's what that 2-year-old needed. That's why their problem behavior was off the charts because you didn't look at what was most appropriate for them developmentally. And so involve the parents into it. Like, okay, when's their usual nap time? Oh, they're struggling with naps. Talk to me about that. This can be something that maybe we need to address so that they're able to get the rest that they need to help prevent these problem behaviors that y'all are seeing in the witching hour, which, by the way, every parent sees. So good luck to you. The hours between 4 and 6 until you've got elementary school age children, good luck to you. And that's what a lot of BCBAs also don't want to understand or try to understand or empathize with, which is they lose their minds when they go home, but they have no problem telling a caregiver, yeah, Let's do 40 hours a week for your 2-year-old who's clearly exhausted. Great. Involve the clients in what you're doing. It's meaningful. That's how we do this in a child-led way. We involve their interests in a way that will help provide the variable that's necessary for the behavior of assent. When we make things meaningful, we increase the opportunity and the likelihood that these learners are going to assent to whatever it is. It matters to them. If I ask my son what's happening right now in science class, he's like, I don't know. But if I ask him right now what's happening between the World Series, okay, let me tell you what's going on. Don Mattingly is now a Blue Jay, and if he wins, if the Blue Jays win, then he's going to get his ring. Jen Ferris knows. So he was like, so I'm going to go for the Blue Jays because by default, that means I'm going for the Yankees. This is how his mind works. It's meaningful to him. I also, when I'm trying to teach him coping skills, do the same thing. So I'm like, okay, dude, here's what I want you to do when you're starting to have a challenge. I want you to close your eyes and picture yourself on the baseball field. Can you see it? Yep. Now take a deep breath as you're running to first base. Now exhale as you're going to second base. Inhale as you're going to third. Exhale as you're going to home. Now that's a box breath, my friends. Did I introduce box breathing to my child and say, I'm going to teach you how to use box breaths? First, you're going to breathe like this. Then you're going to breathe like this. No, I made it meaningful for him. And that's how we do that, my friends.
Meg, I think you touch on a really important connection when we talk about values versus committed actions and looking at that within selecting goals.
Yeah,
And we get so stuck on, well, if they don't complete this specific activity or this specific target to demonstrate this skill, then it's not happening and or it's not, they can't do it, right? Or
right. The
whatever.
can't.
Yeah, they just can't. We can't. And if we look at the selected vehicle, so to speak, or activity that we're choosing, and look at that as like our value, like this is what is valuable to me, is that under these conditions that I find valuable, you will demonstrate these committed actions. And we get so inflexible that
Yeah,
we lose complete sight of like, wait a second, if I can find this meaningful value for them, that the skill can be demonstrated through, whether it's an activity they prefer or something that is usually like reinforcing. And it's like, oh, you can show me through that in that avenue, in that context.
yep.
Now we're connecting values all the way down to the very goals and the activities that we select to demonstrate
That's true
skill.
incorporation, right? When we can do it
That's
that way. Like
all.
talk about a wraparound.
Mhm.
Yeah. And when we look at that trauma-informed lens too, that's how we can ensure that that's going to happen. Yeah. Okay, goals. How many of y'all involve your learners and your stakeholders in goal development? This is actually, I'm going to be honest, this is something that I struggle with my own BCBA team with doing. They're like, no, I put in a goal for that. I'm like, but why? Just because you observed something in an ABA session or because an RBT reported something to you does not make it socially significant. So you have to ask the caregivers, is this actually a problem for you? And they're like, no, that's actually never happens outside of ABA. Then it's not socially significant. And talk about 10 years ago, Jen, when 10 years ago, I this is a hill that I died on one session. And it's one of those things that keeps me up at night because I was subbing for another BCBA during social group one night, and I did not know this kid very well. And per the behavior intervention plan, his phone had to be turned in, and he couldn't have access to his phone. So I'm following this procedure step by step because I don't want to mess up. And I don't even know what the replacement behavior was. In all honesty, it was probably something like engaging in a coping skill. Um, and I held the phone for the entire group of that entire time of the group. And it was like just he went through a full-on extinction burst. And his mom was like, "Why? Why didn't you let him have his phone? He's 16 years old." I created a problem for literally zero reason because he was engaging in behaviors where I was like, I know how to stick it to you. Let me take your phone away from you. Even though I should have reinforced it when I first started seeing the precursor behaviors, right? 10 years ago, though, right? What do? You usually make the wrong choice. Self-reflection is a powerful tool, so is time. But looking back, I not only should I have, well, the BCBA in question, never mind. I should have trusted my instincts on that one. And I should have reinforced at that precursor, right? But more importantly, before that was even a response strategy for a behavior, it should have been looked at as to the parents, like, is this something that you even want to worry about? Clearly, you sent them to social group with their phone, so you aren't anticipating that it's being taken away. But we like to think in ABA that we have to create the challenge. And sometimes in some contexts, right, we have to present things for them to assent to. But that doesn't mean we have to make it worse. It doesn't mean that when we say, okay, go to the bathroom, they're devoid of something, a fidget. Nope. Mm-mm. No. In fact, I did tell our representative for the health department who comes to do like our little check-ins, and he asked about like our disinfectant bucket that we keep in the bathroom. And I was like, yeah, it's because we always have kids who bring toys in with them. And he was like, You can't do that. I was like, that's why we have the disinfectant bucket. And he was like, oh, that's right. So as long as you disinfect it right afterwards, totally fine. It just can't go from the bathroom to common spaces without having been disinfected, in case y'all are wondering what our law is here. Um, but again, when I look at the social significance, I'm not going to deny them non-contingent sensory reinforcement for them to go to the bathroom whenever you go to the bathroom with your phone. Why are we doing that to these kids? It's the same thing. Um,
I think that speaks
yeah,
to kind of the overall culture and expectation we've been taught to have, that every day we need to anticipate that there's going to be challenging, distressed, dangerous behaviors, and that's the
right.
norm. And that if that's not happening, oh my gosh,
We're
something is
doing something
wrong.
wrong.
Something's wrong. We're having a good session, or they're giving indicators, and I'm reinforcing, and we're shaping, and we're moving on, and able to transition and redirect and be flexible and choose something else to demonstrate the skill. And I feel like until we can make that complete paradigm shift of, it's okay for it to be flipped, and begin to expect, like, oh, it's going to be a good day. We're going to have a really good day.
I'm more concerned on the days when I look at data and I'm like, what the hell happened? Why
Hmm.
digital reinforce the precursor? Why do I see a 3 hour long protest for a kiddo? Why do I see an hour long protest for a kiddo? Right? Like that to me is more of a red flag than seeing just good old fashioned skill acquisition programming happening.
Yeah. Or when a kid has, maybe is coming down from an illness or they're just kind of having a rough phase.
Yep.
And have some of my RBTs or student analysts come in and they're like, Dr. Z, something's wrong. Like something's wrong because, it's been so hard the last couple of days. And having to remind them, well, that's why they're here. We're not, every day is not going to be sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
But then, think about that it's like 80-20. So we can't think that that 20 is going to go down to nothing. Like, are you a happy, relaxed, regulated person 100% of the time, 24/7? No, you have shitty days, you have shitty weeks. Shoot, this whole year has been one cluster, right? And I think we've got to really sit down and look and self-reflect on like why do I walk in every day, and that to me is what I've been taught is the norm, that it's successful when we have challenging behaviors, it's successful when we see all of these things, and if we don't, boy, we better like instigate something, stir something up
Right.
to
It's
save
this
those nuts.
mindset of like, why do we, the stirring of the pot?
Hmm.
It's
and
too good.
And some people might say, well, then if we don't have challenging behavior, then insurance is not going to cover the services anymore. To which I say, okay, you may not have those severe distressed behaviors, but if you're a good behavior analyst, you're going to say we still need to shape down, or now there's more subtle social things
Now
happening.
we've got these other milder
Mhm.
behaviors happening. Yeah.
Mhm. And
That are still barriers.
yeah, and we still need to work on them. And we know that when puberty comes along, those are probably
Hmm.
going to escalate and be inflamed by hormones. And now we have other, you know, um, hygiene skills, which is not an activity of daily living. It's an adaptive behavior skill to teach someone how to, to teach a young woman how to handle having a period and putting on a
Hmm.
pad, because the outcome goal is that she can do this without care.
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah, I think that whole mindset needs to shift, that it's
Agreed.
okay if 80% of your days are good. You don't have to stir the pot.
Yeah. And it's almost like this kind of like, why are you looking for trouble? That might require some self-reflection. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And especially when we talk about like what's truly important for those learners and for their families. The the parents typically aren't trying to stir the pot. Yeah,
That's the
interesting stuff.
last thing they want to do, because they
Yeah.
live with the stirred pot at home 24
Yep.
7. They just want the peace. They want to keep the peace, which is what we
Yeah.
should be doing too.
Ooh, yes. So Jen, why don't well, I think this assessment or the assessment table was a labor of love for sure. We put in the book a list of assessments. We put in there some of the pros, some of the cons, what the age range was, what the target skills are, right? If they're adaptive skills or if they're verbal behavior skills, relational frame theory, and then training websites too, or access to direct trainings for them. Um, but I do think that when we're looking at like what's meaningful, this is one of the first places that you start. So insurance is going to require standardized assessments. Yeah, we get that. 100%. That's fine. That's not where you're going to take all of this information, though, and apply it. Now, let's do something that's going to assess some skills that are going to be meaningful for the caregivers and meaningful for the learner, which might require that you do an additional assessment in addition to whatever it is that you're whatever you're assessing with direct observation, right? Um, so this is a great tool to go to figure out what's going to assess the skills that I actually knew, that I need to know, what's going to be valid and a valid tool for this particular kiddo, not just what's the norm, but what's going to be meaningful for them, right? So I'm glad that we put this in there. Really glad. And then Maudie also goes into developmental milestones within one of our chapters, which is again one of those parts that if it wasn't in your course sequence, it is a huge detriment because without knowing exactly where a child is supposed to be developmentally, you're going to put your predisposed or biased view on it and say that a 5-year-old is supposed to be doing things that a 9-year-old doesn't do. Um, so just be aware of that too. And I'm so thankful again that we added that into the text as well. It's a helpful piece for sure. Who's gonna go into this one for us? Jen, I know a lot of it is for you, like when we talk about direct instruction and designing. So I don't know if you want to take that away or Maudie, if you do. I know we've got a little bit of a time crunch, so just make sure that we end on time.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. And I think this is also exactly where we pick up next time. This is
Perfect.
the last E is for education. So, education is kind of, and knowledge is what's left after all the teaching is done, right? Just because you taught somebody something, it didn't mean that they learned it. It doesn't always carry away. And so when we talk about education in Reframe, it means supporting learners, and ourselves as practitioners, right? And ensuring that we're designing, we're selecting the right, it starts at the assessment, right? We're selecting the right assessment tools. Great. We're developing socially significant goals that are appropriate based off of developmental milestones. Great. Okay. And now how do we teach those? And so it's really about, selecting instruction and instructional arrangements that are going to work for your learner and are going to work for you as the implementer. So, I'm gonna not climb too far on my soapbox here, but this is an under-taught tool in behavior analysis. We are the science of behavior and the science of teaching, if you will, yet nobody learned how to design good, effective instruction. That's a problem. You can't get good, effective teaching, learning outcomes without having good, effective instruction. And so thank you to my colleagues and friends and mentors in the precision teaching community and instructional design community who I was lucky enough to learn how to do some of these things with. And so we're going to get into some of this the next time that we're here, where we can have some activities that we do together to say, okay, we taught you what the REFRAME acronym is. We taught you all the things that are behind it. We've talked about all of the reasons why and the hows, and now let's actually have some meaningful knowledge that you will, you have the knowledge, right? Now let's get the takeaway tools of how you can do this. So we're going to practice some of this next time. But looking at things that are, a composite skill is really big. A component skill goes into those skills, and then tool skills are kind of on the bottom. I think about them as spider webs that kind of cross and interconnect, and where things go. And so every larger level skill is a series of smaller level skills. And many of those smaller level skills and less complex skills are a sequence and combination of other less complex skills, right? And if you don't learn where to connect the dots or where the dots are disconnected, then you don't know where your instruction should start. You don't know where it should finish, and you don't always have the right path on how to get there. And assessments don't teach us how to do that. And in fact, curricula don't teach us how to do that either. They tell us what to do, but they don't teach us how to do it. And so we have a full section on how you actually do this so that you can learn if you don't already know how, or get better if you do already know how, or breeze through it because you're like, I've got this. But in case you don't, how do you take a skill and build an effective program that will work? And it's important to remember that the environment, right, is what permits the behavior to occur. If the environment has historically not been safe or conducive, the behavior may never occur, right? And so if the environment has been determined to be safe by the individual, then not only can that behavior change, but new behaviors can be taught that are also unique within that context. And so it's important that we think about that certainly all day, every day, but also as we're thinking about how we move and through instruction and design and curricula, right, about how all of those kind of pieces come together. I'm just noticing the time. How are we? Does anyone want to kind of pop in to add anything on that, or does this feel like a
Well, and I'll say this, like when we're talking about this type of design and we're talking about the education of it, like we often insurance limits what we do, right? When we're looking at that type of application, which is the majority of our field. So when we're looking at what it is that many of us do as behavior analysts, it's not designing what it should look like, right? And that's a disservice, right? Truly, to our learners, to the stakeholders, to ourselves, to our field. When we look at most data collection systems now, they are designed with a library in hand, right? It's one of those things that you pay for. Oh, well, I've got a library of 150 programs with 50 targets each. Plug and chug, ready to go, right? They're set to auto master and auto introduce. That legitimately takes away the analysis part of the application of our science. So when we remove the critical thinking piece, we are removing then our ability to actually do what's meaningful and ethical for our learners and stakeholders. And so that's just my little bit of a soapbox here. You should know how to write a program. You should be able to look at the elements and say, this is my terminal goal. And here's how I'm going to get there with shaping procedures, schedules of reinforcement, most to least prompting faded, going into least to most prompting, using legitimate scientific evidence-based procedures. Otherwise, what we're doing is not behavior analysis, in my opinion. And so when I look at when we look at our learners from an individualized perspective, which we should, and we're doing that direct observation, and we see rote responding happening or table work happening and just this kind of like autopilot response, and then we're just dealing with challenging behaviors as they happen, what skill acquisition is really happening then? What's truly being developed here? It is important for us to be able to say, here's the skill that I observed that is needed to be taught based on the assessment. And based on what I know from you, learner, here's what I'm proposing that we do. But again, people don't ask me my opinion often, and that's probably why. So when we meet again, I can't remember the date because I had it written down and now I can't remember what it was. So if anybody else remembers what it was, we'll record that for the final part of our workshop series, which is exciting stuff. Cool. Oh, and our next piece will be really hands-on. So we'll go through what Jen was talking about earlier. So going like an actual component composite analysis, going through that target skill. We've got our terminal skill. Now, how are we going to develop this? What are the components of it? And then the how-tos of it. Cool. It's going to be good stuff. The stuff you didn't get in grad school or from the white book. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. See you soon.
Bye. Bye, Mom.